Well, joining us here in the studio is the pro-Brexit Conservative MP Peter Bone, who has suggested Britain walks away from negotiations if the EU refuses to move talks on to trade at next week's EU summit. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. You and your colleagues have been called highly irresponsible by Vicky Ford and others. What's your response?
Well, good morning. 477 days to go. Another day nearer coming out of this dreadful European Union superstate, so that's good news. Vicky can write letters if she wants.
Are you being highly responsible?
I'm 100% behind the Prime Minister. In fact, I understand the Prime Minister is thinking about taking me to Brussels to sort the problem out. So...
But you're putting more red lines in her way, making it even harder for her to get that deal and move on to the next phase.
You may say that, but I don't recognise that. I mean, yesterday the Prime Minister agreed that we would end free movement when we came out of the EU. We'd stop sending billions and billions of pounds each year to the European Union. We make our own laws in our own country, judged by our own judges. Well, I think that's what the British people voted for, and if she can deliver that, everyone will be very happy.
If there isn't progress and Britain does not move on to the next phase, should Theresa May walk away?
Well, that is the correct question, because if progress can't be made, the responsible situation is to say, right, we obviously can't do a deal. We have to give our industry enough time to prepare.
So what's the answer?
So, yes, walk away, tell industry that we're going to come out on the 29th of March 2019 on WTO rules, and therefore you can prepare for that. And we won't, by the way, pay billions of pounds to the European Union. So within a few days, I think the European Union will be rushing back to talk to us.
Right. So Philip Hammond is wrong, is he, the Chancellor, to say, well, we still have to pay that money, and we should pay that money even if there's no trade deal?
Yes, he's absolutely wrong. I think he got slapped down by the Prime Minister on that. It's not government policy.
Right. In terms of the no deal, do you have a deadline next week? If there is no movement, should the Prime Minister walk away then?
The question of deadline is interesting. I understand that the European Union is saying within the next 48 hours, if this particular point isn't decided, well, maybe it will be decided and then we're not have to worry about that. But I think the crunch time is the spring of next year, when we have to agree to the principles of the free trade deal. If we get to that stage and we really haven't made progress, I think that's the point that you absolutely must give industry a year to prepare. We can't, as Vicky say, wait until the 29th of March 2019 and find the whole thing collapses. That would be impossible for business. So I think it's a decision that has to be made at a particular time. I think the latest time you can make that decision is the spring of next year.
But Vicky Ford says that would be a disaster. No deal, and threatening a no deal is a disaster. Is she wrong?
Yes, she is wrong on that, because clearly the Prime Minister has said a no deal is a possibility. Is it better to do a deal, a free trade deal? Of course. And of course, if we weren't talking about Northern Ireland now, but we're talking about the free trade agreement, if we had a free trade agreement, the issue with the Northern Ireland border would disappear.
Was it irresponsible of the government not to have properly briefed the DUP with the wording of the document, the draft document, to prevent them walking away?
Well, I don't think actually that's what happened. I think there was a draft document provided by, drawn up by the EU that was leaked, I think in the Irish media. I don't think at any time had the Prime Minister agreed to that. At any time had there been any discussions on the text. So,
should there have been?
Well, if the Prime Minister wasn't going to agree to it in the first place, why discuss it?
Right, but I mean, in terms of those words, regulatory alignment, what do you think the solution is to the Northern Ireland and Irish border?
Well, the solution is a free trade area. If we have a free trade agreement, the problem disappears.
Right, but what about the Irish government, who want to ensure that they are going to still have the same sort of customs and regulations that exist now?
Well, if you talk about a no-deal situation, what would happen in Northern Ireland? We could decide what border. We don't have to put any duty on goods coming in from the European Union if we don't want to. We can have an open border. It would then up to the Irish whether they build a hard border, and I don't think that's their position.
Right, so you'd be happy to see a hard border then in that.
No, I think I said the opposite. I said the British government would not impose a hard border. We're against that. We want a frictionless border, and the only people who seem to be talking about a hard border is the European Union.
Right, but as Ireland has said, they don't want to see anything that could look like any sort of checks being made. They want to keep it frictionless. The only way to do that is to have the same customs and regulations. Do you accept that?
Well, that's where they're wrong. It's absolutely right you can have a frictionless border. I mean, if we're not imposing any duties or tariffs, there's no need to check anything. So I think it is a lot of argument about nothing. There is not going to be a hard border in Northern Ireland, whichever way you go, whether there's agreement or there isn't. So whilst the European Union are making this a big issue, I don't think in reality it actually is.
Right. What about the Brexit impact assessments? Are you disappointed David Davis hasn't been able to provide those?
Well, there aren't any, so he couldn't provide them, and it would be absurd to think that the government was doing Brexit impact assessments across the country on how many different types of Brexit could you get? I mean, the basic thing is the government knows what it wants to do. It wants to have a free trade deal with the European Union, wants to stick to if you call them the red lines that the Prime Minister answered my question to yesterday.
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg called them red lines, didn't he?
Well, he called them pink, actually.
Well, all right, we can argue about the colour. Do you think the deadline is going to be met next week and that there will be movement on to phase 2, Martha?
I don't have a crystal ball about whether that deadline will be met, but I think what's absolutely vital in all of this is that we make sure that high standards are enshrined, that rights for ordinary people and their families are enshrined.
And how do you do that?
Well, what we need to see is two things. Firstly, there is legislation going through Parliament at the moment which is about bringing European law home.
The EU withdrawal
bill.
The EU
withdrawal bill. What's absolutely critical in that bill is that things that people and communities here enjoy now because of their membership of the EU, whether they wanted to leave the EU or remain in it, that those protections, those rights are enshrined in domestic law.
And the government said they will be.
Well, we will see next week what happens on that. At the moment, we don't have agreement that the Charter of Fundamental Rights will be enshrined in black and white in our statute. So what we think is leave the EU or remain in it. That is by the by. The point is we need to have high standards and we need to have rights protections here. And we can do that, but it has to be in black and white in statute so that it can be enforceable after exit day.
Should the Charter of Fundamental Rights be there in black and white?
I've listened to hours of lawyers arguing about this. On one hand, they say it needs to be in the bill. The other say, no, it doesn't. It's the principle. I think whatever happens, I agree entirely. We must have the highest of standards. We will continue to do so. When we're an independent nation, of course, we can strengthen and increase those standards if we wish to.
Right, and what guarantees will be given? And Parliament says sovereignty actually should have come back to them as parliamentarians to see which laws are actually going to be included and which aren't.
Well, this is what this debate about, but what we're saying is all the laws, all the EU laws, are going to become effectively British laws on the day we come out. So there'll be the day before and the day after will have the same standards.
But of course, there's one really pernicious exception. In this great copy and paste job that has been done in the withdrawal bill, one thing has been carved out, and that's the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. And at the moment, there is an argument going on about why that one piece of law hasn't been included. And what we're saying is that for people's rights, whether that's about privacy, whether that's about having access to fair insurance premiums if you're a woman, or access to pension rights if you're a gay couple, all of these things which are derived from European law and European rights, they should be brought home. And at the moment, the government has not committed to putting those rights in this bill.
But I've had the argument, I've heard eminent lawyers tell us that's exactly what this bill does. And Parliament should discuss it. But at the moment, I'm persuaded, the government has persuaded me they're right, but I'll listen to the debate, and if I persuaded the other way, I will vote for any amendment. But I think that the government, I think all of Parliament is agreed. We want to bring in the same standards of protection that we have now afterwards, and it's just a mechanism for doing it.
Peter Bone, thank you.